Have you ever felt that something is wrong in your life, but you can't quite explain what it is? As if, no matter how hard you try to improve, something pulls you back into the same mistakes, the same destructive patterns, the same cycles of frustration. Perhaps it's that inner voice that sabotages you at the most important moments, convincing you to give up just when you're about to achieve something significant. Or that irrational anger that arises out of nowhere and explodes in situations that, looking back, weren't even that serious. It could be the envy you deny feeling, but that silently eats away at you when you see someone achieving something that deep down you also desire. Or that paralyzing fear of failure that makes you hide behind excuses and procrastination. What you don't realize is that all of this is not an accident. There is a force operating in the shadows of your mind, shaping your personality, your reactions, and even your choices. A force that you have spent your whole life ignoring, but that has never stopped acting. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the hidden part of your psyche, where you buried everything you didn't want to see in yourself. Your repressed desires, your weaknesses, your shames, your darkest emotions. Everything you once hid to be accepted by the world. But here lies the problem. What you ignore controls you. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you pretend it doesn't exist. On the contrary, the more you reject it, the more it grows in the underground of your mind, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It surfaces when you explode for no apparent reason. When you push away the people you love and then wonder why you are always alone. When you judge others with hatred, not realizing that you are merely projecting onto them what you fear most in yourself. When you sabotage yourself, fail on purpose, and in the end, convince yourself that you were never good enough to really try. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." If you do not face your shadow, it will continue to pull the strings behind the scenes while you believe that everything is a matter of chance. But if you have the courage to look within, if you are willing to confront what you have always avoided, you can transform the shadow into your greatest source of power. And that is exactly what you will discover in this video. Get ready, because this journey will not be comfortable. But if you truly wish to break the cycle of self-sabotage and take control of your life, this is the only path. Let's begin. Since the moment you were born, you were taught about what is acceptable and what is not. From a young age, you learned that some emotions should be shown, while others needed to be hidden. You may not even remember, but you heard phrases like, "Stop crying, don't be weak. Don't be angry, be a good person. Don't be so selfish, share." And so, little by little, entire parts of you were repressed. What happened to your anger, your sadness, your desire to assert yourself? What happened to those impulses that didn't fit the image of the right person that the world wanted you to be? They didn't disappear. They were pushed to the depths of your unconscious, forming what Carl Jung called the shadow, the hidden part of your personality, where all the feelings, desires, and impulses you rejected to be accepted by society are stored. The shadow is not an abstract or distant concept. It is within you now, operating behind the scenes of your mind. Every time you feel uncomfortable in front of someone who is overly confident, it may be because, deep down, you have repressed your own desire to express yourself. When you harshly criticize someone seeking recognition, it may be because there is a desire within you to be seen, but it has been buried under layers of self-denial. When you feel envy of someone's success, it may be because you have repressed your own ambition, because one day someone told you that wanting too much was arrogance. And so, without realizing it, you walk through life like an iceberg. The part that others see is just the visible tip, but the largest part of who you really are remains hidden below the surface, invisible even to you. But ignoring the shadow does not mean it stops acting. On the contrary, the more you deny it, the more it manifests destructively in your irrational fears, in your tendency to repeat the same mistakes, in the resentment you cannot explain, in the toxic patterns that repeat like an endless cycle. The real question is not whether you have a shadow. The question is how much it is in control of your life without you realizing it. But how exactly does this hidden part of your mind manipulate you and trap you in patterns that seem impossible to escape? In the next part, we will dive into the subtle and destructive ways your shadow acts without you noticing. And when you see this, you will no longer be able to ignore it. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns repeat in your life? Why, even when trying to change, it seems like you always end up back at square one? Why do you feel anger, envy, or fear without a clear reason? All of this happens because your shadow is not asleep. It is in control. And the worst part, it acts without you realizing it. The shadow does not attack directly. It does not shout. It does not announce itself. Instead, it operates subtly, silently, manipulating your emotions, your choices, and your reactions. It acts like a ghost within you, distorting your perception of reality. You think you are in command of your decisions, but in reality, you are being guided by hidden impulses that were buried years ago. One of the most common ways the shadow manifests is through projection. Have you ever felt an inexplicable hatred for someone? Have you ever criticized someone with extreme intensity without a real reason? This happens because we often see in others what we do not want to admit in ourselves. For example, a person who was taught to suppress their own ambition may feel irrational contempt for those who seek success. Someone who fears their own aggressiveness may hate direct and assertive people. Instead of recognizing these traits in themselves, they project them onto others and attack. Another destructive mechanism of the shadow is self-sabotage. This occurs when, unconsciously, you create obstacles to your own growth. You procrastinate at crucial moments, give up too soon, make wrong choices repeatedly, all because there is a part of you that believes you do not deserve success or fears the consequences of change. This explains why many people fail just when they are about to achieve something significant. The shadow acts as an invisible guardian, preventing you from leaving your comfort zone, even if that comfort zone is your own unhappiness. And it doesn't stop there. The shadow also manifests in your relationships. Have you noticed how some people always seem to attract the same types of toxic partners? How some people always end up in destructive friendships? This happens because, without realizing it, we project our traumas and unconsciously seek situations that reinforce our deepest fears. If you have a shadow filled with rejection, you may be drawn to people who reinforce that rejection. If you carry within you a shadow full of insecurity, you may connect with people who make sure to always leave you doubting your own worth. And the worst part, the shadow can take over your identity without you realizing it. You convince yourself that this is just how it is, that your way of acting and feeling is natural, when in fact it has been shaped by a buildup of repressed experiences. You start to believe that you're just unlucky, that you have always been anxious, that you have never been good enough, when in reality, you are just living under the influence of this hidden part of yourself. But if the shadow has so much power over you, the obvious question is, how can we recognize the signs that we are being dominated by it? How can we know if it is not ourselves in control, but rather this dark side of our psyche? In the next segment, we will dive into the clear and undeniable signs that your shadow is manipulating your life without you realizing it. And when you see these signs, it will be impossible to continue pretending that it does not exist. If your life feels stuck in a cycle of repetitions, if you constantly feel frustrated, anxious, or unable to change certain behaviors, then it is possible that your shadow is in control without you realizing it. But how can you know for sure? How can you identify the signs that this hidden part of your psyche is manipulating your choices and silently ruining your life? The first clear evidence of the shadow's dominance is constant projection. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to irritate you more than usual? That certain traits in others provoke a disproportionate emotional reaction in you? This happens because the shadow makes you see in others what you do not accept in yourself. Someone who has repressed their own need for attention may feel an irrational disdain for people who express themselves freely. A person who rejects their own aggressiveness may be excessively bothered by those who are more direct and assertive. The problem is that as long as you do not recognize that this irritation comes from within, you will continue blaming the external world for your own internal conflicts. Another sign that the shadow is in control is constant self-sabotage. Have you ever been on the verge of achieving a goal and suddenly everything started to go wrong, as if somehow you were digging your own defeat? This happens because the shadow fears change. If at some point in your life you were taught to believe that you do not deserve success, love, or happiness, this repressed belief will continue to operate in the back of your mind, finding subtle ways to ensure that you never surpass those limits. That is why so many people give up just when they are about to achieve something significant. The third symptom of an uncontrolled shadow is the repetitive attraction to toxic relationships. If you always get involved with the same type of person, someone who devalues you, ignores you, uses you, this is not a coincidence. There is something within you that seeks this dynamic, even without realizing it. If you were rejected in childhood, you may spend your entire life unconsciously seeking people who reinforce that rejection. If you grew up being taught to repress your own anger, you may be drawn to people who abuse your patience, simply because your shadow has found an indirect way to express that repressed energy. Moreover, a powerful sign that the shadow is dominating your life is the irrational fear of judgment. Are you terrified of being criticized? Do you avoid exposing yourself as much as possible, fearing you might look ridiculous? If so, your shadow is likely filled with repressed shame. Perhaps at some point you learned that making mistakes was unacceptable, that being authentic meant risking rejection. The result? A lifetime lived defensively, always trying to please, always trying to avoid any chance of being seen as wrong.